Hello and welcome to episode 2 of MATLAB Psychtoolbox programming for noobs. My name's Alec and let's get started with today's lesson. So today's lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to build some of our own functions. We're going to work with Psychtoolbox functions. We're going to look at some MATLAB functions. But today is really about building your first really basic script. And then we'll create a master sheet that runs all of the scripts that we create today, and I'll show you how to do that. So let's just jump into it. So like our last video, I went over how to navigate all this. If you have any questions, so like what the command window or the workspace is, go back to that video, refresh yourself. But over here on the left side in our folder, we have some scripts that I've already designed. So let's just go ahead and open all of these. So each one of these is going to do something different. So this is going to be our master sheet. This is going to be sort of our roadmap for the lesson today. At the top of our scripts, we've named it. These little percent signs mean comments, so they don't actually get run by the program at all. Here I wrote out a clear CLC, which is going to clear our command window and our workspace. It's usually pretty good practice to do that at the top of any experiment that you run, just in case anything gets messy down here. And then the first thing that we're going to do in our experiment, and I'll just sort of do this one by one, is we're going to collect some data. And this is going to be the part of the experiment where when you run this, you are going to get this little pop-up down here in the command window. And this is pretty much how you'll start most of your experiments, is you'll get like a subject number, and then you'll get like an age, gender, and then it'll ask you, if you design it this way. I designed it this way just to show you guys how to use an if statement, and we'll talk about that later. But in this case, I'll just put 0 for now, and then it gives us, again, this struct over here on the left side, which is going to define some variables for us. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, and let's look at how we do that in our script. So this is a function that I wrote out that is how we input this information. So the way that we do that is at the very top we're going to write the word function, and then we're going to have our output, which is always on the left side of our equation here. So in any equation in programming, the left side of the equation is always your output, and on this right side, we're usually going to have two elements. The first element is going to be this name, and this is the name of the function. This is what you'll call your function over here. So you can see this is the same name over here, alec_data, and then at the top of my function, I call it alec_data. This is how we're going to refer to it later in the program when we want to call this function to run itself. We're going to refer to it by this name. And then in most cases, and we'll talk about this later, you're going to get a parentheses after your function name. And the parentheses is going to be the input to the function. And we'll talk about what that means a little later. But for now, we're actually going to get our input for this function from the function itself. So we're going to be using a MATLAB function called input, and that's how we're going to get our information. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type out DISP, and DISP just means display, and it'll display in the command window the words "Welcome to our experiment." So you're going to put that in the single quotation marks, and that's going to be what you display down here. So the next thing that you're going to put is going to be data.nr. So this is us creating a struct, and in this struct we've got subject number, which I've called nr, we've got age, we've got gender, and we've got training. So when we run this, which we just did, we'll get our one by one struct. So it's like an easy way to refer to data later if we want to input it somewhere else. And then, so this will be our output, and again, this will be our input. So we'll put input, and then the way that this function works is you'll just type out in single quotation marks what you want the input to ask for. So just like we ran it, it'll ask you for the subject number, and then I put like a little colon afterwards. Makes it look neat. Um, and you can pretty much do that for all of them. Don't forget your semicolon at the end. Um, and then the only one that's going to be a little different is going to be the input for gender. So when we want to store gender, we're not typing zeros and ones, we're typing M or F, and I signified that here in the display part. So down here, I've got like gender, it's going to ask me male or female, and I want to store this variable as a string. So that just means it's like a letter. So if I were to look into my data and go into gender, that gets stored in this matrix as a string variable, which is a letter. So let's go back here. How did we do that? So we put our input here in the single quotation marks, or we've got that there, and then we separate it by a comma. And then in another single quotation marks, we put a little s, and that saves it as a string variable. So that's pretty simple. That's just a very basic function by using MATLAB functions for input. And then when this gets run on our master sheet, we can just evaluate it this way as well. When that gets run, we'll get our one by one struct of data. So the next thing that we want to do is let's look at how to create our own function. So what we do is we're going to go over to the function that I created. Cool, so let's look at this. So in a function, if you are creating your own, you need some sort of input like I was saying before. And in this case, our input is going to be data. So we created data down here in our workspace, so we know that we can refer to it. So this function knows that if you put in parentheses after its name, I just called it my function, it knows to call the data from the workspace. And again, on your left side, you've got your outputs. So anything you create down here that you want to end up in your workspace, this is where you're going to put that. So I want to output the value of bananas, the value of oranges, and the value of strawberries. These are just ambiguous. This is just to demonstrate how a function works. So let's go down here and let's look at what I do. So all I'm doing, and you can do this with really complex equations, but and you can use functions and all kinds of stuff like that, but right now all I'm doing is I'm assigning the value of my subject number to bananas, and then I'm assigning the value of age to the value of oranges. So bananas should be 1 and oranges should be 21. Then I'm taking the value of data.nr, which is 1 plus 21, and that should be 22. So we should get 1, 21, 22. So let's run this we can copy paste the function into our command window. We can also just evaluate it. Cool, so now we have bananas as 1, we have oranges as 21, and we have strawberries as 22. So the output to the function is always going to be the thing that you end up putting into the workspace, and the input is what you're calling from the workspace. And since we've got this all laid out in our master sheet, we can see that whatever gets created here ends up getting dropped down here, and then what gets called down here usually is going to get dropped down here. In this case, we're using data again. So it kind of like works as a waterfall. So they all kind of work into each other that way by placing inputs and then placing more outputs. So that's how you create your own function. Let's go to our initialize. So this is going to be our settings that we want to create. So let's go find that over here. So this is our initialize. So at the beginning of our experiment, this is usually going to be the first script, one of the first scripts to run after you collect your data, because first you need data in order to input it into this function. So our output, again, is going to be our settings. The name of our function is going to be alloc_initialize, and the input is going to be data that we get from our workspace. So let's create this settings struct, which again is going to go into our workspace. So this is the little if statement that I created to show you how training, data.training is going to change depending on the value that you assign to it when you're inputting your data during the Alex data function. So here we assigned it to the value of 0, and we can double check that by clicking on data. We can go to training, and we can find the matrix that assigned it to 0. Okay, so we know that. Let's go back to initialize. So we know that when it calls for data, it's going to call it as a 0. So this if statement is asking us with this little phrase right here, which is the double equal sign, is a logical argument, which is asking us if data.training gets assigned to the value 0, if it is logical to the value 0, then I want these settings. Then this is what's going to get evaluated right here. If data.training gets assigned to anything else other than 0, we're going to go down to this else statement. And then these are the settings that are going to get called. So if this else statement wasn't here, if it looked like this, then if data.training was anything other than 0, then it would just skip this if statement completely. So the else statement is just there to give a substitute for anything other than an input of 0. So let's look at this. So we created a struct just like in our last video where we've got some general settings, we've got some layout settings, and we've got some sound settings, and within those, little substructs. And then down here in this else statement, we've got some different settings. And the only really big one that I want to look at is the settings of the color of the text and the color of the background. So we assigned the background color to 255, which I believe is white, and we assigned the text color to 000, which is black. And we could also just write this as a 0, but just for cleanliness sake, we'll just leave it at that, so that everything sort of looks the same. Now down here, so this else statement, so if data.training gets assigned to a 1, then we're going to get these settings, and we'll get a background of blue. So we've got 00255, so that means blue is turned all the way up, and red and green are turned all the way down. And then we should get a text color of red, because red is turned all the way up, and green and blue are turned all the way down. So we've collected our variables down here, so now we have some sort of input for this. So let's run this. And again, since we know that data.training is equal to 0 currently, we know that, or let's hope that we get these settings. All right, so we evaluated, and let's look at our settings, and let's look at layout and color, and yep, so our background color is going to be that black, or is going to be that white, and then our text will be black. So now we know that everything's going according to plan so far. So yeah, let's just keep moving on. So now let's go down to the, let's go back to the master sheet first. So now we've created our data. We've made our own function, which we made strawberries, oranges, and bananas. And then now we've created our settings, which are down here in the workspace, which we got from inputting our data and then running this function. And now what we want to do is we want to actually use these settings. So now what we're doing is we are creating a function here, I'll just show you the script. So what we're doing here is we're opening a screen. This whole thing is going to open a screen. It's going to turn the background white. It's going to display hello world, and then it's going to wait 3 seconds, and then it's going to close. And so here, I actually didn't write this all out. So let's turn this into a function. So we'll write our function word, and then we need some sort of output. So, well, we're not really creating an output here. So let's just keep it as is for now. So we're not really creating an output, but we know that our settings are down here. So when it calls for them, we don't need to write like function and then output x and like Alex screens and then like settings. Settings are down here. So all we're going to do is just continue running our script. And the way that this is written in the master sheet, it'll just run this script because it knows to call for it over here, which is this one. So it'll just run this script. And so let's look at how it runs that. So this first line here is actually a Mac OS specific line. So if you are running on a Mac, just type this at the top of your script because it just has to do with how it syncs the refresh rate of the screen. It's not really super important. Just to know how it works, just type it at the top of your screen. And yeah, that's it. So let's look at this line by line and see exactly what's going on so that we know how to like pull up a window, because there's some things that you have to do before you can just start drawing on your screen, obviously. So first thing you're going to do is you need to create a variable called screens where you use the screen function and call all of your screens. So what that means is we're going to create an output of screens, which should show up down here in our workspace, and that output is going to contain a 1x2 matrix because right now I'm working on 2 screens. So what this does is it's a screen function that that calls all screens. So the command calls all the screens and calls them all into a matrix. If I had 0 screens, or if I had 1 screen, then it would be a 1x1 matrix with the number 0 in it. If I had 2 screens, which I do, I would have a 1x2 matrix with the numbers 0 and 1 in it. If I had 3 screens, it would be a matrix of 1, 2, or 0, 1, 2. So right now I'm working with 2 screens. So my current screen is actually my external monitor. So this whole window will be referred to as 1, and my main monitor is going to be referred to as 0. So when you call this function, let's just evaluate it and see what happens. So here's my matrix, and this is going to represent my main screen, and this is going to represent my external screen, which is the screen that I'm on currently. So when I refer to this later, I know that I want to refer to this 1 so that I'm not drawing on my other monitor. So now that we have our matrix that calls all of our screens, now we want to identify which screen we want to talk to. So we'll call that our screen number, and this is going to be the screen that we're referring to, and What we're doing is we're using this MATLAB function called max, which just identifies the max value in a matrix and returns that. So in our screens variable down here, and you can see this in the workspace, in our screens variable, we've got the 0 and 1. Max is going to identify the 1, which is the screen that we want to draw to, and it'll output that to the screen number. So when I evaluate this, I should get down here in the workspace screen number and then value of 1. So let's evaluate it. Cool. And now we have screen number with a value of 1, and it shows up down there. Cool. So we know that that works. So we know now that when we refer to screen number, this name right here, I know that it's going to have a value of 1. I could draw to my other monitor by typing min here, and that'll just identify the lowest number in the matrix, which would be 0, and that means that it's going to draw to my other monitor. But I want this one, so I'll just leave max. So this one is going to be a little bit more complicated. We'll go through it one by one. So the first thing, let's look at our outputs. So we get 2 outputs here instead of just 1. So the first output is going to be another settings. It's going to be a part of our settings. So when this gets assigned something, it'll go into the settings struct that we've already created down here. It'll recognize that and get put into our settings. So the struct that I've constructed here is a set of screen settings, and then I'm calling this one the out window. So this first output, when we use the open window screen function and command, the first output of that command is going to be essentially your drawing board. So it's going to be like, imagine if you had a piece of paper and you were drawing on that piece of paper, that piece of paper is going to be your out window. And then eventually what you'll do is you'll flip that piece of paper and actually show it on the screen. And then you'll be telling it, which screen do you want to flip? You'll want to flip your out window. So that's your first output. Your second output is going to be the dimensions of that screen. So here I've labeled it as settings screen out window dims, which is going to refer to out window dimensions. And just very quickly, when this gets output, this output of the screen open window command is going to be 1x4 matrix of a 0, 0, 1280, and 800, I believe. So let's just set this right now. Sometimes I get a little tentative about running this because sometimes it'll just crash. Well, let's try it. Let's just run this, and if it doesn't work, then we'll see what happens. So let's copy paste this into the command window. So we've opened up Psychtoolbox, we've opened up our window. Okay, cool. So, well, we got an error message. Let's see if it got put into settings. Okay, so it didn't. So I'm just not gonna mess with this right now, but your out window dimensions are gonna look something like this. It's gonna be settings screen out window dims, and then that's gonna equal a matrix that looks like this. So now you can see it gets added to our screens function. And what this means, here I'll go into it real quick. So out window dims is going to be this. So we're going to get a matrix of 0, 0, 1280, and 800. And these refer to X and Y axes of your monitor. So the first one is going to refer to, or the first two refer to the top left of your screen, so right up here. And as you move to the right, you are increasing on the x-axis. So as it goes over to the right, it's eventually going to end up as the number 1280. And then if you go down, it'll eventually end up to the number 800. So this is just to show you that like how the dimensions of your screen work. I can do like more complicated videos later on like how to interact with this matrix and really easy ways to like find the center of your screen and things like that, and to draw in different places. But for now, we'll just leave it at that. So now let's go over to the right side of this equation here. So this is going to be where we call our function. This is a Psychtoolbox function screen. And then here's our command. So we're opening up a window. And then we are, so yeah, that's the command. And then it's gonna want to know which screen you want to draw on. So we defined that as a variable over here, so we called that ScreenNumber. So instead of typing a 1, we can just type our variable. Just in case later we want to change this to like min, we don't have to go through our program and find all the times that we used the words, or we don't have to go through and find all the times that we used the function screen and identified what screen we want to draw on. It'll just do that automatically because the value of ScreenNumber will have changed. So let's change this back. So now we've defined which screen we want to draw on. And now let's look at this last one. So this is where we're actually going to get the setting for the screen that we pull up. So we know that we're opening up a window, but it wants to ask us what color that window is. And we defined that when we defined our settings back in our initialize. So we already have that set here. So it's just going to call the window white. And then, yeah, that's that one. That's pretty much all there is to that. So now down here, let's look at what this is. So this is another Psychtoolbox function. This is the draw formatted text function. And this is a really helpful one because it recognizes really easily what you want to do. Like when I want to type the words like hello world, it'll just type those for me. I don't have to like draw the vectors of the H and connect them like using inputs for out window dimensions and use a lot of equations. Like it just knows to type hello world. So the first input is going to be which screen we want to draw on, and again we want to draw to this out window screen. The second input is going to be what we actually want to draw on that screen, and then the next two inputs are going to be centering those words. So it's going to center hello world right into the center of my screen. I could actually change this by turning this into like 100 or I don't know, like 500 or something. And remember that you're dealing with X and Y axes, so it'll find where this is on the X axis along here, and then that'll be the new point. I don't want to mess with this right now because I just want it to be centered. This is just a faster way of doing it, of just centering whatever you want. But you feel free to play like around with that and see like where everything actually is by putting numbers here instead. So, and the last thing that we are going to input is the color of this. So we defined that in our settings, so that I believe should turn out black, and then we say cool. Now we've drawn on our out window exactly what we want. The last step sort of here is to actually take what you've drawn and put it on the screen. So the screen in its natural state isn't getting drawn on. The screen in its natural state is static, and then you have to flip your new static screen. So We come down here and we use the screen function again, and our command this time is going to be flip, and then our other input for that is asking us what do you want to flip, and we want to flip this up here that we got from the output from this equation. So we flip that, and then the last thing that we're doing is we're waiting 3 seconds. So this is a MATLAB function. It just says wait secs, and this number, the input for that is just going to be in seconds. So I had it wait 3 seconds. And then the last thing we're going to do is we'll use the screen function again to just close all the windows. And the only input you need for that is just to close all of it. So that's how you open a window. So just delete that real quick. Now let's go back and let's redo all of this really fast. Oops. And let's see how we get this information on there one more time, really quickly. So first we'll get our data, and I'm just doing this manually the way that it would run this script anyway. So we'll get our data, subject number 1, age string 1, male, and then we'll do the 0 training. And then, cool, so we got that. Now let's evaluate the function that we made. Cool, so we got our outputs for that. That works. And now let's use the data input to create our settings. Because we're, we need, it's asking us, do you want training or not? Is that, what's the value of that training? And it needs to know that in order to know what settings to output. So let's evaluate that, and cool, we got our settings, and hopefully this works. Let's evaluate this. So now we're going to pull up our screen and run the program that we just created. Cool, so we got it to pull up, it says hello world, and it closes. And that's all we did. So that's awesome, I'm glad that that worked. And let's go back to the beginning of the experiment, and let's run this with the different settings this time. So let's show, I just want to show you what it's like to run this where you can actually change the if statement. So before we put training as a 0, this time we'll put it as a 1, and that should change the settings that gets output. And this time let's run it for real. So we just click run on our master sheet instead of doing it manually. Do subject number 1, everything else is going to be the same, but this time for training we'll put a 1. Cool, and pull up our window, and hello world, and these are the different settings now. Cool, and so we can see that everything still got put in our workspace. We can even look at our settings, and we can look at layout and color, and we see that the background color was supposed to be blue, and the text color is supposed to be red, and that's awesome. So now we know that that if statement works. So that's how you create your own functions. That's how you use MATLAB functions for programming. Again, feel free to let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I strongly encourage you to go back to that first video and just look at some of the basic things that we talked about, and definitely go through that PDF that I put on there. I think that I couldn't actually attach the file to it, so I just put a link to the website that I got it from, and I'll do that again for this video because learning the syntax of MATLAB is also super important. And then if you have any questions or things that you want me to go over in a future video, you can let me know in the comments down below. Thanks.